Welcome back to Plato's Republic. Today we're going to finish up Book 5, and when we do, we'll be at the halfway point, at least book-wise. Plato's Republic consists of 10 books. I think we're actually a little bit more than halfway as far as the word count goes, so go ahead and pat yourself on the back for that. If you're just joining us, don't pat yourself on the back quite yet. You will probably want to start this series at the beginning with Book 1. I got a link to the full playlist down in the description for you. Everybody else, if you remember from yesterday's video, the beginning of Book 5, we had some modest proposals from our man Socrates. He started out with one set of ideas, which was pretty radical for the time, which was that men and women should all be able to have the same jobs. I don't think anybody was really advocating for that until like the 19th century, besides Socrates. But he makes a pretty compelling argument that there's really no jobs that women should be barred from having. And his argument just says that, look, let's look at, if we want to look at the nature of men and women and look for any, innate differences, then the only real ones we can point to are that women are capable of bearing children, and on average, they have less physical strength than men. He says, kind of taken individually, none of those things should prevent a woman from being a shoemaker or a carpenter or a doctor or a guardian. So these are the soldiers of this ideal city. And pretty compelling logic overall. I don't know why more people didn't listen to him throughout history. Maybe it has something to do with his second set of proposals, which got a little bit more ludicrous sounding. So after he talks about how men and women should be treated equally from a vocational perspective, he starts to advocate for the abolition of the family, at least within this guardian class. So he says that since we want to have the best city and the best guardians, the best way to do that is to ensure they have kind of the best breeding, just the same as you would do with dogs or horses. You get your best specimen and pair it with the other best specimen. And so as a result, what you'd have in this ideal city is you'd need the rulers kind of acting as the geneticists or the eugenicists, saying, okay, you're the best man, you're the best woman, you two need to mate and have a beautiful child. But you will not be able to keep your beautiful child because we need everybody kind of more attached to everybody else than they are right now. Family relations sort of lead to faction. So what we're going to do instead is when you give birth, your baby will be taken away from you and kind of put in with all the other babies. Sort of like, I guess, an incubator at the hospital, except none of the babies have a name tag. So you never really know which one's yours. Instead, you are supposed to treat all of the babies born around the time as your actual biological offspring as your sons and daughters. So people have, many daddies and many mommies. And so he says that he kind of comes up with all these extra rules around that. He's like, okay, so you're not allowed to like sleep with any of your like mothers or fathers, even though there are a lot of them. But you are allowed to sleep with your brothers and sisters because you're probably not actually biologically related. And then he's got, I think you have to get some extra approval from like Pythia or something. I didn't totally understand that part, but he's clearly really thought out all the little details of how this would work. And sort of the central part of this was the use of language and these labels, and saying the problem here, preventing people or causing conflict within societies, is the concept of mine and not mine. And so we just want to get rid of that as much as possible. So we're going to get rid of all this private property, and then we kind of get rid of these private social relations. And the example that I gave was like little Timmy doing well at the baseball game. If little Timmy only has one father, then that father's really proud, and the other fathers don't care or like a little bit mad. But if he's kind of the communal child, then everybody's proud of little Timmy, and everybody gets along better. And so he makes this case that it will lead to there will be less violence in the society, and it'll be more peaceful, and you won't have lawsuits as much. I don't. I mean, maybe all this stuff would come true. It's all extremely hypothetical. It's interesting to think about because it's just so radical. At one level, you think, okay, this could never work because all human societies have been predicated on kind of nuclear families of some sort. Like, you got a child and it belongs to like one or two people. We'll just kind of use that as the minimum. And if you think a little bit more about it, like, you know, where did nuclear families come from? Have they been since forever? Like, do all kinds of primates have nuclear families? Like, where did this start? Like, where did marriage come from? You think, well, marriage is not really a natural thing. Like, monkeys don't go to like the monkey priest and sign a contract saying that their property is combined, and that they won't cheat on each other till they die. And so if you kind of rewind the tape of history a little bit, it's like, well, okay, marriage kind of came out as a legal contract. Why do we have legal contracts? Well, we had those starting around the time when we needed to trade things and enforce the terms of those trade. Well, when did we start trading things? Like, well, we only started trading things when we had kind of extra stuff to trade. When did that happen? Kind of around the agricultural revolution, around the time of when farming was invented. And you make enough stuff that you have a surplus and you can trade it with other people and get, you know, shoes from the shoemaker and carpentry from the carpenter. When did that, like, why did we have agriculture? Well, we had that when people were able to kind of live together and cooperate and have similar ideas about their values, their perception of reality, kind of what's good and bad, what's allowed and not allowed. Well, when did that come about? Why is that possible? I think a lot of that's the role of myth and religion, that we can kind of all agree on how the world works and who's in charge. And I think that kind of speaks to the earlier books here in the Republic. He's saying, look, society is essentially built on lies, at least this ideal society, and probably most societies besides this one that he's building. And these are just necessary to make sure everybody is cooperating. So if you take that perspective, then maybe the nuclear family and traditional marriage aren't so central just to human existence. And maybe we could find some other arrangement here. And so that's kind of what he does. He's kind of just rearranging the social relationships with the use of mythology and kind of founding a new set of myths and societal lies in order to make that happen. So I think it's all very fascinating as just this as political philosophy. Is it going to be practical, or will it be viable? Remains to be seen. So we've got he's said brings to the story up to the present moment. He said that he's shown that this is sort of the best society, that everybody has this kind of esprit de corps. Because everybody's sort of related, like if one person's in pain, then everybody kind of feels that pain. Basically just good for like your national morale and getting people fired up to go to war with the other city-states, I'm imagining. But it's really just about kind of social cohesion. So he's now going to see whether this is the most, or whether this is a viable proposal. One other thing I was thinking about, I was just thinking about a little bit more about this last night. It's, you kind of think, people treat the family as so sacrosanct, but at the same time we have other kind of societal ills, and you wonder what are you actually willing to trade? Are you willing to give up things like nuclear family relationships in order to solve other problems, or are there other problems in society that are so bad that we're willing to give up some of our traditional ideas about that. The one I talked about in one of the first videos was just the idea of inheritance. Like, rationally, from a societal perspective, doesn't make a whole lot of sense that some people just get a ton of money and for being born to certain people, and other people don't get a ton of money. Another set of ideas you might consider is, like, we could probably get rid of all forms of racism worldwide within a couple generations just by swapping babies around. So it's like, you give birth to a baby and you just get kind of another baby, maybe from another race, born around the same time, and you raise that one as your own. That would probably end up solving a lot of problems. Like, you would have babies of, like, at all strata of society, you'd have babies of all races. And so you kind of would lose any perceptions, or kind of any statistical perceptions you might have of, like, oh, these people are poor because they're this race, or these people are rich because they're this race. It's like, no, you just kind of have them all, all colors scattered throughout the entire society. That, you could, is it worth solving racism in a generation? Or is it worth kind of giving up your biological ties to your children in order to solve racism, like, for all time? I don't know, maybe. Like, parents are supposed to love their adopted kids as much as their biological kids. Why are we so tied and addicted to raising our own biological children? Are we willing to give that up in order to create a more just society? I think, similarly, are we willing to give up this idea of a kid just being yours, or a father just being yours, in order to create something like a more cohesive social unit, and maybe one that's, like, much stronger and able to withstand attack? Kind of famously, Athens collapsed, even though it was the sort of the center of culture and learning and philosophy, because they weren't they just weren't as good at war. I mean, there were a lot of historical circumstances, but they weren't as good at war making as societies just dedicated to warcraft. So I don't know. It's worth kind of pondering these big ideas, and I love that they are such big ideas. So that's all I want to say as we dive into the second half here. Yeah, leave a comment if you have another crazy social proposal that no one will take seriously, because, as he says, it's the unripe fruit of laughter's wisdom. Keep it in mind. Okay, so getting back to middle of book 5, now we're starting to talk about the war making capabilities of this ideal society. Okay, Socrates. As far as war is concerned, I think it is clear how they will wage it. Glaucon, how? Socrates. They will go to war together. What is more, they will take the children with them to war, when they are sturdy enough, so that, like the children of other craftsmen, they can see what they will have to do in their own craft when they are grown up. But in addition to observing, they should help and assist in every aspect of war, and take care of their mothers and fathers. For haven't you noticed in the other crafts how the children of potters, for example, assist and watch for a long time before actually putting their hands to the clay? Okay, so you bring the kids to war. Bring your daughter to war day is what he's advocating for. Glaucon, I have indeed. Socrates, well, should these people take more care than the guardians in training their children by appropriate experience and observation? Glaucon, of course not. That would be completely ridiculous. Besides, every animal will fight better in the presence of its young. That's true. Glaucon, that's right. But there is a risk, Socrates, and not a small one either, that in the event of a disaster of the sort that is likely to happen in a war, they will lose their children's lives as well as their own, making it impossible for the city to recover. Okay, so it's like, if your unit gets completely wiped out and your kids are wiped out, there's not much of a city left. Socrates, that's true. But, in the first place, do you think they should arrange for the avoidance of all risk? Not at all. Well then, if they must face some risk, shouldn't it be one in which they will be improved by success? Ooh. Okay. So he's just saying, okay, yeah, you bring your kids, it increases the risk, but it also increases the benefit. Or your probability of success. But you think, do you, that it makes little difference so as not worth the risk, whether or not men who are going to be warriors watch warfare when they are still boys? No, it does make a difference to what you're talking about. Starting from the assumption, then, that we are to make the children observers of war, we must further devise some way of keeping them safe. Then everything will be fine, won't it? Yes, alright, just keep the kids safe at war. Well, in the first place, their fathers won't be ignorant, will they? But rather as knowledgeable as people can be about which military campaigns are dangerous and which are not. Presumably so. So they'll take the children on the latter, but be wary of taking them on the former. Alright, so yeah, you don't take your kid to Waterloo. Take him to a nice picnic battle. And they will not put the worst people in charge of them, I presume, but those whose experience and age qualifies them to be leaders and tutors. Yes, that would be proper. But we will say that the unexpected happens to many people and on many occasions. The fog of war. Yes, indeed. So that with that in mind, my friend, we must provide the young children with wings at the outset, so that, if the need arises, they can fly away and escape. How hard is that? Just give all the kids wings, and there you go. Problem solved. What do you mean? We must mount them on horses when they are still very young, and when they have been taught to ride, they must be taken to view the fighting, not on spirited or aggressive horses, but on the fastest and most manageable ones. In this way, they will get the best view of their own future job, and will be able to make the safest escape if the need arises by following their older leaders. I think you were right. Some parts of this book are just so detailed. He's like, all right. They'll go to battle, but they'll be on really fast horses, so you don't need to worry about them getting killed. All right, I think you're right. What about warfare itself? How should your soldiers behave toward one another and the enemy? Are my views correct or not? Falcon, tell me what they are. Okay, the other thing, this kind of tells me, I don't know if Socrates was like a warrior or Plato was a warrior, but the first thing I'd be thinking was like, you'd have, if you brought all the kids into battle, they're like, oh, there's a group of children on horseback that are like the future of the society. If you're the enemy, you'd just be attacking those, right? Like, I don't know. He's talked about the importance of deception and error this whole time. If I were in charge, I'd be like, okay, what we need are decoy children somehow, and because the enemy are definitely going to be aiming for the kids if they're trying to wipe out our society, which I think they kind of would try to do back in this time period. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not a soldier either, but I've been reading a lot of military history lately, so I feel qualified. Okay, Socrates. If one of them leaves his post, throws away his shield, or does anything else of that sort out of cowardice, shouldn't he be demoted to craftsman or farmer? Certainly. And if anyone is captured alive by the enemy, shouldn't he be presented to his captors as a catch to use however they wish? Absolutely. But if someone distinguishes himself and earns high honors, do you or don't you think that in the first place, while still on campaign, he should be crowned in turn by each of the adolescents and children who are with the army? Ah, that's an interesting idea. Have the kids crown you. That'd be a kind of a cool ritual. Why don't we do that? Glaucon, I do. What about shaking him by the right hand? So specific. That too. But I do not imagine you would go so far as this. As what? That he should kiss and be kissed by each of them. Glaucon, by all means. I would add to the law that while they are still on campaign, no one he wants to kiss shall be allowed to refuse, so that if anyone passionately loves another, whether male or female, he will try harder to win the prize for bravery. Okay, so Not only did he advocate for women in the workplace and women in the military, he was advocating for kissing on the battlefield. None of this don't ask, don't tell in Socrates' military. Socrates, excellent. We've already mentioned that more opportunities for marriage will be available for a good man, and that men like him will be selected more often than others for such things, so that as many children as possible may be produced from them. Glaucon, yes, we did mention that. Socrates, moreover, according to Homer, too, it is just to honor in such ways those young people who are good. It is just to honor them. For Homer says that when Ajax distinguished himself in battle, he was rewarded with the whole backbone, since he considered that to be an appropriate honor for a courageous young man, because it honored him and built up his strength at the same time. Was rewarded with the whole backbone. What does that mean? Iliad 36. I don't know if that's a sex reference or what, because he was just talking about how these good men, like, get to have more sex or more opportunities for marriage. Yeah, and built up his strength at the same time. I think that's a sex reference. I'm not 100% sure. Glaucon, that's absolutely right. Socrates, then we will follow Homer in this matter at any rate. I mean that at sacrifices and all other such occasions, we too will honor good men, and insofar as they have exhibited their goodness, not only with hymns and all the other things we mentioned, but also with seats of honor, cuts of meat, and well-filled cups of wine, so that while honoring our good men and women, we may train them at the same time. Okay. Give them a feast. That's an excellent idea. All right. And if any of those who died while on campaign has had a particularly distinguished death, won't we, in the first place, declare that he belongs to the golden race? Oh, yes. That's the society I want to live in. You have been admitted to Valhalla. Oh, yeah, okay. I think he's... So the C note, I think, was talking about this myth of the metals, where the guardians have gold in their souls, and you don't want to mix gold and silver. So that's kind of why you steal the baby in the first place, and why you tell them they're not allowed to have real gold, because it'll like corrupt their spiritual gold. Okay, so if you die valiantly in battle, you are said to belong to the golden race. Glaucon, absolutely. And won't we believe with Hesiod that, whenever any of that race die, they become unsullied daemons living upon the earth, noble beings, protectors against evil, guardians of articulate mortals? Glaucon, we will certainly believe that. Won't we ask the god, then, to tell us how and with what distinction these daemons, these godlike people, should be buried and perform their burial in whatever way he prescribes? Is this going to be... Okay, ask the god. Is that the Apollo at Delphi? Apollo, yeah. Tell us, Apollo, how to bury this dude. Of course. And for the remainder of time, won't we regard their graves as those of daemons? So remember, these daemons are like halfway between gods and men. They're like the sons of gods. And take care of them and worship at the same time. Take care of them and worship at them. Worship at them. And won't we follow those same rites whenever anyone who has been judged outstandingly good throughout his life dies of old age or in some other way? Goggin says it would be just to do so at any rate. Well, there's a very famous saying, who was it? Douglas MacArthur very famously said, I think it was like a speech to Congress or something, he said, "Old soldiers never die, they only fade away." A little bit poignant. So I think it was at MacArthur's retirement. Basically, the idea is like when a soldier dies young, they get a hero, they get this heroic burial, they get their whatever posthumous Medal of Honor. And old soldiers, nobody really knows. They're like, oh yeah, well you did well too, but you didn't die. So you kind of forget about them by the time that they die. But Socrates is saying it's important to honor them too. Give them just the same rights. Glaucon says it would be just to... I was laughing. Glaucon says it would be just to do so, but it's probably... I think in practice that doesn't actually happen. Because it's like, wait, which war did you fight in? What? What'd you do? Socrates. Now, what about enemies? How will our soldiers behave toward them? Okay. I'm curious about this because the last time we really saw enemies was in Book 1. Polemarchus's definition of justice, recall, was helping your friends and harming your enemies. And Socrates' argument was that it cannot be just to harm your enemies because you make them unjust thereby. So this is why I'm really curious about how these soldiers are going to treat their enemies, whether it's going to be in concordance with that analysis or if there's going to be a contradiction here. And I've talked about other contradictions that have been in this book so far, so I'm really fascinated by those because it's kind of gives you like a little wedge or opening to try to figure out what Plato's really trying to say or Socrates really believes here. All right, well, so I'm excited. How do they treat their enemies? Glaucon, in what respect? Socrates, first, as regards enslavement, do you think it is just for Greek cities to enslave other Greeks? Or should they try as hard as possible, not even to allow other cities to do so, and make a habit of sparing the Greek race as a precaution against being enslaved by barbarians? Sparing them is by far the best course. So, they should not possess any Greek slaves themselves and should advise the other Greeks to do the same. Okay, yeah, it's like, look guys, I know it's tempting for us to enslave each other, but if we do that, we might get weaker and then the barbarians will come in and enslave us, or they'll get the idea, or we'll be sold to the barbarians. Well, let's make a little pact here. This is interesting because... Okay, so I'm kind of thinking this in the context of like ethno-nationalism. So this ideal city has essentially been like a nation state. It has all the function of government, of defense. It has its own military, and since it's at the small level, he's saying we could kind of do this intermixing and baby swapping, and everybody's sort of this big. It's kind of like this family nation. But there's this larger structure here, and it's just like this larger racial structure that says, well, there are these other Greeks. How do we treat these guys who are in our race? So we have kind of three. There's like you got barbarians, you got Greeks, and then you have the city-state. In modernity, the paradigm for the most part is that it's like the race and the nation, or the city-state and the nation-state and the race often overlap. Not everywhere, of course. You have multicultural societies, you have multiracial societies, you have multilingual societies. For the most part, most countries, the nation corresponds to an ethnicity, the ethnicity corresponds to the language. So this is just kind of provides an extra complication to that model. This is almost like, I don't know. I think maybe the nearest analogy would be like the British Commonwealth. To be like, okay, look, we're all kind of British here. Like, you're Australian, I'm from New Zealand, or this guy's from Canada. But we shouldn't be like attacking and enslaving each other, right? Because like we're all kind of British here, even though we're not really British. So maybe that'd be the closest analogy. Okay, Glaucon. Sparing them is by far the best course. So they should not possess any Greek slaves themselves. Yeah. Greeks don't own Greeks. Glaucon, by all means. In that way, at any rate, they would be more likely to turn against the barbarians and keep their hands off one another. Okay. Yeah, so you're starting to get the hint of like the modern nation here with these guys cooperating, but not quite. Maybe there was something with that historically with like the Delian League, but I couldn't actually tell you because I don't know the history well enough. All right, Socrates. What about despoiling the dead? Is it a good thing to strip the dead of anything besides their armor after a victory? Doesn't it give cowards a pretext for not facing the enemy, since when they are greedily bending over corpses, they will be performing an important duty? Haven't many armies been lost because of such plundering? Okay, yeah. Like, I want to go fight the enemy, but I gotta pick this body clean first. Like, you guys go on ahead. This is important. Gawkin, yes indeed. Don't you think it is illiberal and money-loving to strip a corpse? Isn't it small-minded and womanish to regard a dead body as your enemy, when the enemy himself has flitted away, leaving behind only the instrument with which he fought? Do you think that people who do this are any different from dogs who get angry with stones thrown at them, but leave the person throwing them alone? This is a weird tangent. No different at all. But again, you got another dog reference. So the whole time the Guardians have been compared to hound dogs, and now I don't know what it means. Another dog. Socrates. So they should not strip corpses, should they? Or refuse the enemy permission to pick up their dead. Okay, so he's treating the enemy pretty well here. He's saying we shouldn't enslave them, and we shouldn't strip their corpses, and we should let the enemy pick up their dead. He's not making the argument that he did in Book 1 that doing this is all just. It's all kind of self-interested. It's all in the service of strength. Isn't that interesting? So, yeah, all these things that he's doing, he's saying, like, look, if we allow corpse plundering, we're going to have all these cowards not actually going into battle. We don't want that. If we allow Greeks to enslave other Greeks, we're going to make ourselves weak to the barbarians. We don't want that. So I don't know. This is really interesting because in some ways he is making Thrasymachus' argument. Okay, so this whole time this has been about being the best city. And being the best city looks a lot like being the strongest city. Okay, so everything here seems to be in service of strength and making these soldiers as strong as possible, as cohesive as possible, and maybe justice ultimately is that definition Thrasymachus gave. That is, whatever is advantageous to the stronger. I don't know. Isn't that an interesting thought? Okay. Okay, so yeah, they should certainly not refuse permission to the enemy. Moreover, we surely won't take weapons to the temples as offerings, and if we care anything about the goodwill of other Greeks, we especially won't do this with Greek weapons. On the contrary, we would even be afraid of polluting the temples if we brought them such things from our own race, unless, of course, the god ordains otherwise. Okay, yeah, and respect their temples. And, yeah, if we care anything about the goodwill of other Greeks, so that's just like, again, it's not because it's just to do this, it's because it helps you later if, like, you got some good PR with the other countries. They're like, oh, they ransacked our temples. We got to get revenge on those guys. Like, oh no, they were respectful to our temples. Like, we lost this one. Better luck next time. That's absolutely right. What about ravaging Greek land and burning Greek houses? How will your soldiers behave toward your enemies? I would like to hear what you believe about that. So the one thing I'm reminded here, and I'm sorry I don't know my Greek history better. For me, what's hanging over all of this, and this might be an anachronism, so I apologize in advance if it is the Melian dialogue. Look that up. Melian dialogue. It's a very famous passage in, I want to say, Herodotus, who basically invented a dialogue, but about an historical event. So it's kind of a lifetime movie reenactment of genocide. And I want to say it was the Delian League was trying to expand, and they're like, hey, Milos, this is an island in the Aegean. They're like, you need to get with the program. You need to join our empire. And the Melians are like, screw off. We're not going to do that. And the Athenians are like, no, I don't think you heard me. If you don't join our empire, we're going to kill all of you. And they just said, well, let me think about it. And they were like, all right, come and get us, coppers. Good luck. And the Athenians just completely wiped the place out. And this was kind of like a low point in Greek and Athenian history. Like, they were really ashamed of this afterwards. I want to say Pericles in particular said that this was just like a stain on the Athenian soul. And so when he's talking, and it was basically Greeks just wiping out other Greeks. So there was ravaging Greek land and burning Greek houses, exactly what they did to Milos. So if that happened before the Republic was written, I would be reading this in the context of that, because it's something I think the Greeks felt pretty guilty about. If it happened after, then it's just some food for thought. So I don't know. Melian dialogue, really, really fascinating idea. Kind of usually assigned as like an early example of realpolitik in ancient times. Okay, so Dawkins wants to hear what you believe about that. Socrates. Well, I believe they should do neither of these things, but destroy only the year's harvest. Do you want to tell me why? Okay, just don't burn their house, just destroy 1 year's harvest and you're done. No salt in the fields. Dawkins, of course. Socrates. It seems to me that just as we have two names, war and faction, here he comes examining these words again, so there are also two things, and the names apply to differences between the two. The two I mean are, on the one hand, what is one's own and kin, and on the other, what is foreign and strange. Faction applies to hostility toward one's own, war to hostility toward strangers. It's also interesting, I mentioned Wittgenstein in the last video. One of his famous ideas is that of family resemblances. So we kind of use words to group together things that resemble one another. And that's basically that's just like the basis of all our reality. We say, oh, that's a backpack because it resembles other backpacks. And so that's sort of being similar or not similar. Socrates is kind of looking at the same question here with these words faction and war. Okay, Glaucon, there's nothing wrong with that claim. Socrates, consider then whether this too is correct. I say that the Greek race, in relation to itself, is its own and kin, but in relation to barbarians, is strange and foreign. Okay. Maybe he really wants a nation state. I don't know. Glaucon, that's right. Socrates, when Greeks fight with barbarians, then, or barbarians with Greeks, we will say that that is warfare, that they are natural enemies, and that such hostilities should be called war. But when Greeks engage in such things with Greeks, we will say they are natural friends, that Greece is sick and divided into factions in such a situation, and that such hostilities should be called faction. This is really interesting. This is him using that language again to shape thinking and then having thinking shape the reality. So this is this is a kind of like proto-nationalism of saying, okay, look, we're all on the same team here. Let's just call this. We'll just say that Greece is sick and divided, not that these are two separate nations fighting one another. And it's basically this sort of like Greek proto-nation is constructed through language, and this linguistic construct. It's similar in terms of the rhetoric. As I mentioned, I've been reading some war histories. In particular, I've been reading about the American Civil War, and the North was fighting the South. So the Confederacy, the Southern states seceded and formed a Confederate government, and then the North just kind of had their own government continuing, and all the Southern representatives left. But they couldn't agree. They almost couldn't agree on the reality of the Southern government. So legally, the Union, so the North, said, no. These states didn't leave. You just had these imposters show up, claim to be representatives of the people, claim to be seceding from the Union, but these guys are all imposters and traitors, and that's not the reality of what's happening. This is like your government is a fake government that's been set up, and we're just going to send soldiers down to like wipe out this fake government with their like fake army. And the South was like, no, we have our own country now. We're a separate country. We're printing our own currency. We're doing everything that countries do. We're a country. And it kind of, in some ways, it came to a head with the kind of the international maritime law. This is a weird digression, but I'm going to go with it. So Abraham Lincoln's like, okay, we need to blockade the South. But people are like, dude, you can't, like, you can't blockade your own country. That actually does not make any sense. It's like not legally possible to blockade your own country. But that was the legal fiction the North continued, that that secession actually never happened. There was just these clowns running around claiming to have seceded. But so it was kind of like, I don't know. They were using the language of the having a separate country or not having a separate country being a sick and divided union, and the phrase, I guess Lincoln famously used the phrase, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And it was again, it's like, okay, no, we're just one house here. It's not like a duplex. He was quoting the Bible, but yeah, I think this is how reality is constructed for people. Is like, do you think of Greece as sick and divided, or do you think of these cities being the primary units and that they're fighting against each other, and there is no larger Greece that is like sick and divided? All right, cool stuff. Glaucon, I for one agree to think that way. Socrates, now, notice that whenever something of the sort that is currently called faction occurs and a city is divided, if each side devastates the land and burns the houses of the other, the faction is thought abominable, and neither party is thought to love the city. Otherwise, they would never have dared to ravage their own nurse and mother. But it is thought reasonable for the ones who have proved stronger to carry off the weaker one's crops, and who have the attitude of mind of people who will one day be reconciled and won't always be at war. This is just like the American Civil Wars. You had Sherman like marching through Georgia, just burning stuff left and right, and people were just so mad because he wasn't just. Sometimes people like, there was sort of a mixture of things where they'd be like, oh, sometimes we're just taking the crops, don't worry, once the war's over, we'll be reunited. But then other times they're just like, screw this, we hate you guys for seceding, you guys have been a pain in our ass for the last 50 years. There's one story in particular where I think for the most part they kind of preserve, like they take the crops but they just like tear up the railroads. But there's a great story in Sherman's memoirs where he says he gets to this big plantation house, and they're just like taking some crops, taking some forage, and I don't know, some cured meat and whatever they needed. And they're going through this stuff, and they're like, wait, like, I recognize this name. It was one of the Confederate generals. He just like happened to end up at the plantation that belonged to a Confederate general. He's just like, oh, hell no, we're burning this place to the ground. Screw this guy. And it does. I think it did make a big difference on the psychology after the war, because people at least perceived that Sherman had just destroyed everything in sight, and they like people in the South still will talk about Sherman's march. Like they're still 150 years later, they're like still kind of mad about it. And that's Socrates is talking about the exact same thing 2,500 years ago. It's like, how do you treat people who are maybe kind of like. Maybe you'll try to reconcile. Like, if you actually want to reconcile, don't burn their houses down. Like, this is some wise stuff coming out of the past at you. Should have read this, Sherman. Glaucon, that attitude of mine is far more civilized than the other. Socrates, what about the city you are founding? Won't it be Greek? Glaucon, it will have to be. Oh yeah, we never said what race of people were in this ideal city, or ethnicity, or culture. Glaucon, it will have to be. So won't citizens be good and civilized people? Indeed they will. Then won't they be lovers of Greeks? Won't they consider Greece as their own and share the same religious festivals as other Greeks? Oh yeah, that's the other thing kind of tying them together. Shared religion. Glaucon, yes indeed. Then won't they regard their conflicts with Greeks, their own people, as faction, and not even use the name war? No, they won't use it. So interesting. And so, they will quarrel with the aim of being reconciled, won't they? Of course. They will discipline their foes in a friendly spirit then, and not punish them with enslavement and destruction, since they are discipliners, not enemies. That's right. As Greeks, then, they won't devastate Greece or burn its houses, nor will they agree that all the inhabitants in any city, men, women, and children, are their enemies, but only those few responsible for the conflict. For all these reasons, they won't be willing to devastate their country, since the majority of the inhabitants are their friends, nor destroy the houses, and they will pursue the conflict only to the point at which those responsible are forced to pay the penalty by the innocent ones who are suffering painfully. Glaucon, I agree that this is how our citizens should treat their enemies, but they should treat barbarians the way Greeks currently treat each other. They should treat barbarians... Okay, the way Greeks currently treat each other, I'm guessing the Greeks are treating each other harshly at this point, at least if that, the experience of Milos is any guide. Socrates, then we also establish this law for the guardians, that they should neither ravage Greek land nor burn Greek houses. It does make it a little less universal when we're finally introducing these like Greek-specific laws. It's, I don't know. I mean, I guess Athens was considered itself the center of the civilized universe at this time, but up to now, everything he had said could apply just to any human society, and now finally it's like, well, all right, it's going to be a little bit Greek-specific. Although I guess we did have, it was Greek-specific before in that we were like modifying some of the Greek poetry and making up stuff about the Greek gods in particular. All right, Glaucon, yes, let's establish it. And let's assume that this law and its predecessors are right. But Socrates, I think if you are allowed to go on talking about this sort of thing, you will never remember the topic you set aside in order to say all this. Namely, oh yeah, aren't we supposed to talk about whether it's viable? Namely, whether it's possible for this constitution to come into existence, and how it could ever do so. Okay, so that actually ties it together, because it's like, if we're talking about viability, we have to talk about the current historical context, i.e. Greece. I agree that if it came into existence, everything would be lovely for the city that had it. I will even add some advantages that you have left out. They would fight excellently against their enemies, because they would be least likely to desert each other. There's that esprit de corps. After all, they recognize each other as brothers, fathers, and sons, and call each other by those names. Yeah, and again, there's the role of language here, is using that language. Like, using the word brother and father and son changes your thinking. And if the women, too, join in their campaigns, either stationed in the same ranks or in the rear, either to strike terror in the enemy or to provide support should the need ever arise, I know that this would make them quite unbeatable. Yeah, I think in war, anytime if the enemy's doing something radically different than you, it just instills fear. Like, what? They've got women in the ranks? What? I don't even know what to think about this. Do they know something that we don't? And I also see all the good things that would have at home that you have omitted. Take it for granted that I agree that all these benefits, as well as innumerable others, would result if this Constitution came into existence, and say no more about it. Instead, let's try to convince ourselves of just this, that it is possible and how it is possible, and let's leave the rest aside. Okay, so Glaucon's saying, all right, you've convinced me this would be extremely beneficial. We'd have such strong soldiers. We'd be badasses in war. So let's just focus on whether it's possible or not. And yeah, just a little reminder, what's the point of all this? Why do we need the best soldiers? Why are we going to war? Why don't we just live and let live? And the reason he gave us, I think in book 2, was that we need to support luxurious living. Socrates, all of a sudden, you have practically assaulted my argument and lost all sympathy for my holding back. Perhaps you do not realize that just as I have barely escaped from the first two waves of objections, you are now bringing the greatest and most difficult of the three down upon me. What? How does that even work? When you see and hear it, you will have complete sympathy and recognize that I had good reason after all for hesitating and for being afraid to state and try to examine so paradoxical an argument. What is he talking about? I have no idea. Glaucon, the more you talk like that, the less we will let you get away without explaining how this Constitution could come into existence. So explain it, and do not delay further. Socrates, the first thing to recall, then, is that it was our inquiry into the nature of justice and injustice that brought us to this point. Glaucon, true, but what of it? Oh, nothing. However, if we discover the nature of justice, should we also expect the just man not to differ from justice itself in any way, but on the contrary, to have entirely the same nature it does? Or will we be satisfied if he approximates as closely as possible to it and partakes in it far more than anyone else? Okay, so is the just man completely just, or is he just the most just person that he knows? Are we doing this in absolute or relative terms, in other words? Glaucon, yes, we will be satisfied with that. Okay, so he's just saying, all right, we're not going to try to, be the absolute spitting image of justice here. He just needs to be more just than anybody else. So, it was in order to have a model that we were inquiring into the nature of justice itself and of the completely just man, supposing he could exist, and what he would be like if he did. Similarly with injustice and the most unjust man. We thought that by seeing how they seem to us to stand with regard to happiness and its opposite, we would also be compelled to agree about ourselves as well, that the one who is most like them would have a fate most like theirs. But we were not doing this in order to demonstrate that it is possible for these men to exist. Okay, so this is when he's putting the, Hitler next to Gandhi, which we were doing back in book 1 or 2, and then seeing who was happier. So this was the argument way back, looking at the Polemarchus and Thrasymachus arguments. Okay, so I'm going to step back for just a moment here, because I'm thinking, now that we're putting it back in this larger context, here's some food for thought for you. Okay, so this is just my own personal theory here. It's probably kind of Straussian. I haven't actually read enough Strauss to know whether it is or not. But what have we done here? So remember what was the problem with the justice being the advantageous of the stronger, or what was the problem with injustice? And he said one of the problems that with advocating injustice, if you have an unjust society, the problem with that is it leads to faction and a drop in morale. That's the main problem with it, is if you've got a country that is fundamentally unjust, people aren't going to be excited about going to war for it. Okay, that was the core issue. What has he just constructed here? He said he constructs justice because he found it in the ideals. He said here's the ideal state, and we got this relationship between reason and appetite and spiritedness, and then that's what the ideal person has, or the just man has. But what's actually going on in this city? They're attacking other cities. Why? As we said at the beginning, the only reason to have this army is to support luxurious living. And we've kind of gotten rid of the luxuries for these guardians. They're not allowed to have anything. And now, what problem has Socrates solved with this? So let's assume that this is actually an unjust society. From the outside, it's unjust. It's just killing these barbarians needlessly, say. Okay? Well, just assume that. Let's just say it's going to engage in some kind of unjust activity. What's going on inside? Are these guys demoralized? Are these demoralized soldiers? Or did he use deception? Did he use this magnificent myth? Did he use the noble lie to persuade the members of this society that they are part of a just society? And did he use other tricks in order to increase their morale and prevent faction? So he's used these lies about kind of who's your father and mother. He's used all the other lies that the Guardians tell themselves about their gold nature and coming from the center of the earth. He's solved the morale problem for the unjust society, and he's used this model of the soul, I would argue, to persuade everyone there that they are individually just. They can do whatever they want to these other societies now. They can just go pillage and murder whoever they want, but they sleep good at night because they're operating under these myths. And the myth could say that these barbarians are the evil people and they need to be exterminated. So, I don't know. This seems like maybe he is sort of the engineer for Thrasymachus in that Thrasymachus argument. Because that's... Yeah, I think I said in one of these early videos, I think that the key, like, maybe we could use deception to have injustice on the outside and justice on the inside. I actually think that's what Socrates has just done. Kind of under our noses here. So I think this is endlessly interesting. But, you know, it's just a theory, just my interpretation. You can have your own. Leave a comment if you do. Okay. I don't remember where we were. So, yeah, we're going to have a model, and we're doing this in order to demonstrate it's possible for these men to exist. We're not doing it. Okay, yeah, so he was talking about Hitler and Gandhi, and we weren't talking about whether Hitler and Gandhi actually exist. We're just talking about their natures. So Glaucon says that's true. Socrates, do you think, then, that someone would be any less good a painter if he painted a model of what the most beautiful human would be like, and rendered everything in the picture perfectly well, but could not demonstrate that such a man could actually exist? Okay, so would he be any less good of a painter? No, by Zeus, I do not. What about our case, then? Weren't we trying, as we put it, to produce a model in our discussion of a good city? Certainly. So do you think that our discussion will be any less satisfactory if we cannot demonstrate that it is possible to found a city that is the same as the one we described in speech? Not at all. So he's saying, look, I'm just a painter of the mind here. I'm just a painter of politics. It's not my fault if I paint this beautiful model, but she doesn't exist, or too beautiful to exist. Glaucon, not at all. And that is the truth of the matter. But if, in order to please you, we must do our best to demonstrate how and under what condition this would be most possible, you must again grant me the same points for the purposes of that demonstration. Glaucon, which ones? Is it possible for anything to be carried out exactly as described in speech? Or is it natural for practice to have less of a grasp of truth than speech does, even if some people do not think so? Do you agree with this or not? Yeah. No, it's like nobody listens to you. You give out these very clear instructions, very detailed. People don't listen. They screw something up. How can I do? Socrates, then do not compel me to demonstrate it as coming about in practice exactly as we have described it in speech. Rather, if we are able to discover how a city that most closely approximates to what we have described could be founded, you must admit that we have discovered how all you have prescribed could come about. Or wouldn't you be satisfied with that? I certainly would. Okay, so it's like, look, we're not going to get this exactly. I'm just going to describe how something sort of like this could exist. Me too. Then next, it seems, we should try to discover and show what is badly done in cities nowadays that prevents them from being managed in our way, and what the smallest change would be that would enable a city to arrive at our sort of constitution. Preferably one change, otherwise two. Otherwise, the fewest in number and the least extensive in effect. Okay. So he's like, all right, we got to take the cities as they are. We can't just go steal children and raise them into this ideal city. So let's just say, like, what's the smallest number of laws we can pass to get to this ideal city where we've abolished private property and families? Glaucon, absolutely. Well, There's one change we could point to that I think would accomplish this. It certainly is not small or easy, but it is possible. What is it? I am now about to confront what we liken to the greatest wave. Remember, because they're swimming in this sea of argument? Yet, it must be stated, even if it is going to drown me in a wave of outright ridicule and contempt, as it were. So listen to what I am about to say. Alright, here's the more ridicule that he's anticipating, just like with the naked women in the palestra. Say it! Until philosophers rule as kings in their cities, or those who are nowadays called kings and leading men become genuine and adequate philosophers, so that political power and philosophy become thoroughly blended together, while the numerous natures that now pursue either one exclusively are forcibly prevented from doing so, cities will have no rest from evils, my dear Glaucon, nor, I think, will the human race. And until that happens, the same constitution we have now described in our discussion will never be born to the extent that it can, or see the light of the sun. It is this claim that has made me hesitate to speak for so long. I saw how very unbelievable it would sound, since it is difficult to accept that there can be no happiness, either public or private, in any other city. Boom! Look at that! Look what he just did there. So everywhere else in this book he's been like, well, wouldn't you agree that the person who should be in charge is the person who knows the most about things? Don't you think the person who knows the most about things is the one who loves knowledge? Don't you think we call that person a philosopher? Blah, blah, blah. Instead, he's just laying it out here. He's just like, all right, bam, here, like, I've prepared the way. Been spending the last 5 books getting to this, just saying that I, Socrates, should be in charge of this place. You guys don't know what you're doing. This is, I love this rhetorical change in strategies. This is not the Socratic method. This is just him, like, dropping the bomb from out of nowhere. So this completely took me by surprise when I hit that. But I love just going through this, just speaking so forcefully here. And here's Glaucon's response. Socrates, what a speech! What an argument you have let burst with. So he's acknowledging that this is completely out of character for him to do. And this is, again, this is interesting. I've hinted at this before, partly because I kind of knew it was coming. But there have been various subtle ways that Socrates has already put himself in charge and kind of denigrated and undermined other people in the society. So remember, he's kind of censoring the poets. He's saying we shouldn't have overly skilled actors. And also he's kind of been the architect of this new city. But now this is where it really comes out. He's like, actually, this whole time I've just wanted to be in charge here, and have the power. So I don't know. And this is okay. Think about this. So we put philosophers in charge. We have these philosopher kings. What is that advantageous for the stronger? Think about that. So now we have the philosophers telling us what to do. The philosopher tells us what justice is. They seem to have created a society that is advantageous for them. So it's both philosophy becomes strength and philosophy becomes power. Interesting to think about. Okay, so let's see Glaucon's response here. What a speech. But now that you have uttered it, you must expect that a great many people, and not undistinguished ones either, will immediately throw off their cloaks and, stripped for action, snatch any available weapon and make a headlong rush at you, determined to do terrible things to you. So if you do not defend yourself by argument and escape, you really will pay the penalty of general derision. I just love that. You're going to have to pay the penalty of derision. Oh, God. Okay. I mean, yeah, this is advocating for a coup d'etat, essentially. So he better explain himself here before someone makes a headlong rush at him. Socrates, but aren't you the one who was responsible for this happening to me? Why is he responsible? I don't know if it's because Socrates has claimed that this is Glaucon's city. Like, oh, and in your ideal city, don't you think the philosopher should be in charge? Or if he's the one who's going to, like, tell other people. because I guess, I mean, it's just been between Socrates and Glaucon. Occasionally we've had Adeimantus butt in, so I guess other people are still listening here at Cephalus's house. Okay. Yeah, just kind of thinking back to Cephalus. Just think about this some more. So the philosopher needs to be in charge. Socrates is saying, like, oh yeah, and eventually, like, I need the power. Cephalus is the guy who's totally happy with his life. Remember back at the very beginning, he's like, yeah, money, like, it's nice, I haven't screwed anybody over, I sleep good, I make my sacrifices out in the back, like, I don't worry too much about, like, women, like, I'm happy with my life, I'm happy with who I am. And Socrates he's not happy with where he is. Like, it seems like he's got this other side that's, like, maybe maladjusted. So I don't know. Maybe Cephalus is the real hero. Miss you, Cephalus. I haven't forgotten you. Glaucon, and I was right to do it. Still, I won't desert you. On the contrary, I will defend you in any way I can. And what I can do is provide goodwill and encouragement, and maybe give you more careful answers to your questions than someone else. So, with the promise of this sort of assistance, try to demonstrate to the unbelievers that things are as you claim. Socrates, I will have to, especially when you agree to be so great an ally. If we are going to escape from the people you mention, I think we need to define for them who the philosophers are that we dare to say should rule. So that once that is clear, one can defend oneself by showing that some people are fitted by nature to engage in philosophy and take the lead in the city, while there are others who should not engage in it, but should follow a leader. Glaucon, this would be a good time to define them. Okay, so now we're getting back to the natures of people, which is always related to their job description. It's like I don't know, Briggs-Myers test. Socrates, come on then, follow me on the path I'm about to take, to see if it somehow leads to an adequate explanation. Glaucon, lead on. Socrates, do I have to remind you, or do you recall, that when we say someone loves something, if the description is correct, it must be clear not just that he loves some part of it, but not another, but on the contrary, that he cherishes the whole of it. Yeah. You gotta love all of me. Glaucon, you will have to remind me, it seems. I do not recall the point at all. Socrates, I did not expect you to give that response, Glaucon. A passionate man should not forget that all boys in the bloom of youth somehow manage to sting and arouse a passionate lover of boys, and seem to merit his attention and passionate devotion. Isn't that the way you people behave to beautiful boys? One because he is snub-nosed, you will praise as cute. Another who is hook-nosed, you will say is regal, while the one in the middle you say is well-proportioned. Okay, just getting some pederasty worked in here. Dark ones look manly, and pale ones are children of the gods. As for the honey-colored, do you think that this very term is anything but the euphemistic coinage of a lover who found it easy to tolerate a sallow complexion, provided it was accompanied by the bloom of youth? In a word, you people find any excuse and use any expression to avoid rejecting anyone whose flower is in full bloom. We call these rose-colored glasses in modern terminology. Glaucon, if you insist on taking me as your example of what passionate men do, I'll go along with you, for the sake of the argument. That's structured like a joke. I don't know if it is, but it feels like one. Socrates, what about lovers of wine? Don't you observe them behaving in just the same way? Don't they find any excuse to indulge their passionate devotion to wine of any sort? Yeah, it's like people who cover their alcoholism with, like, going to lots of wineries. Glaucon, they do indeed. Socrates, and you also observe, I imagine, that if honor lovers cannot become generals, they serve as lieutenants. And if they cannot be honored by important people and dignitaries, they are satisfied with being honored by insignificant and inferior ones, since it is honor as a whole of which they are desirers. Exactly. Then do you affirm this or not? We say that when someone has an appetite for something, are we to say that he has an appetite for everything of that kind, or for one part of it but not another? Everything. It's like, I love Taco Bell, I love everything on the menu. Give it to me. Then in the case of the philosopher, too, won't we say that he has an appetite for wisdom? Not for one part, not for another, but for all of it. Glaucon, true. So if someone is choosy about what he learns, especially if he is young and does not have a rational grasp of what is useful and what is not, we won't say that he is a lover of learning or a philosopher, any more than we would say that someone who is choosy about his food is famished, or has an appetite for food, or is a lover of food, rather than a picky eater. And we would be right to say it. But someone who is ready and willing to taste every kind of learning, who turns gladly to learning and is insatiable for it, he is the one who would be justified in calling a philosopher. We would be justified in calling a philosopher. Isn't that so? Glaucon, in that case, many strange people will be philosophers. I mean, all the lovers of seeing are what they are, I imagine, because they take pleasure in learning things. And the lovers of listening are very strange people to include as philosophers. They would never willingly attend a serious discussion or spend their time that way. Yet, just as if their ears were under contract to listen to every chorus, they run around to all the Dionysiac festivals, whether in cities or villages, and never miss one. Are we to say that these people, and others who are students of similar things or of petty crafts, are philosophers? Asking the right questions, Glaucon. Not at all, but they are like philosophers. Who do you think, then, are the true ones? Okay, so he's saying, like, just because you like seeing things, all things, or just because you love music, that doesn't make you a philosopher. Socrates, the lovers of seeing the truth. Not many of those. Glaucon, that too is no doubt correct, but what exactly do you mean by it? Socrates, it would not be easy to explain to someone else, but you, I imagine, will agree to the following. What? That, since the beautiful is opposite of ugly, they are two things. Of course. And since they are two things, each of them is also one? That's true, too. And the same argument applies, then, to just and unjust, good and bad, and all the forms. Each of them is itself one thing, but because they appear all over the place in partnership with actions and bodies and with one another, each of them appears to be many things. Okay. This looks like the introduction of the theory of the forms. This is a pretty important concept. There's some Greek word for it. I don't know what it is. But he's going to explain this a little bit more. It's like, oh, these are all just manifestations of this one thing in this ideal world. I think that's where he's going to talk about that now. We'll see. That's right, says Glaucon. Well then, that is the basis of the distinction I draw. On one side are the lovers of seeing, the lovers of crafts, and the practical people you mentioned a moment ago. On the other, those we are arguing about, the only ones it is correct to call philosophers. How do you mean? The lovers of listening and seeing are passionately devoted to beautiful sounds, colors, shapes, and everything fashioned out of such things. But their thought is unable to see the nature of the beautiful things itself, or to be passionately devoted to it. Like, yeah, you just like nice-sounding sounds. You don't understand Beethoven. That's certainly true. On the other hand, won't those who are able to approach the beautiful itself and see by itself be rare? Very. What about someone who believes in beautiful things but does not believe in the beautiful itself, and would not be able to follow anyone who tried to lead him to the knowledge of it? Do you think he is living in a dream, or is he awake? Just consider. Isn't it dreaming to think, whether asleep or awake, that a likeness is not a likeness, but rather the thing itself that it is like? Okay, if it is so. Okay, we got this idea of this dream state, where you think a likeness is the real thing. Maybe everything is a likeness. I certainly think that someone who does that is dreaming. But what about someone who, to take the opposite case, does believe in the beautiful itself? Okay, so just in the immediate interpretation would be like, oh, if someone sees a picture of something and they think it's real, wouldn't that person be dreaming? Or like they see a movie of something and they think it's real? They're just dreaming, right? I agree. What about someone who, to take the opposite case, does believe in the beautiful itself, is able to observe both it and the things that participate in it, and does not think that the participants are it, or that it is the participants? Do you think he is living in a dream or is awake? He is very much awake. Okay, so I think is what he's saying here. It's like you see a picture of a rose, you're like, you're not actually appreciating the beauty of the rose, but this rose is participating in beauty. So you want the guy who can appreciate kind of the beauty behind the rose. Of course, everything is ultimately just a picture because we see with our eyes. But he's saying this. I think the philosopher observes with his mind and sees this kind of hidden beauty, I think. So, because this person knows these things, we would be right to describe his thought as knowledge. But the others we would be described as belief, because he believes what he does. Okay, the good old knowledge versus belief conundrum right here. Certainly. What if the person we describe as believing but not knowing is angry with us and disputes the truth of what we say? Will we have any way of soothing and gently persuading him while disguising the fact that he is not in a healthy state of mind? Ah, ain't this the problem with everything? Man, so many people out there, it's like they're mad at each other because everybody thinks the other person's living in the Matrix, especially with like modern politics. It's got all the people on this side are like, oh, you just believe all these lies, and the people on that side are like, you just believe the lies. It's like, we have truth, you have belief. The other guys say, no, we have the truth, you have belief. How do we cut through all this, Socrates? Is there any way of soothing and gently persuading him while disguising the fact that he's not in a healthy state of mind? Again, this is a persuasive master right here. He's like, you can't just say, you're crazy, you believe all this fake stuff, all that stuff about Apollo and the gods, these are lies. I have the truth here. I see the reality behind the images. No one wants to hear that. They're gonna disregard you. Glaucon, we certainly need one at any rate. Come on then, consider what we will say to him. Or, once we have told him that nobody envies him in any knowledge he may have, that on the contrary, we would be delighted to discover that he knows something, do you want us to question him as follows? Okay, so we're talking to the guy who believes something that's not true. Tell us this. Does someone know who knows something or nothing? You answer for him. Okay, Glaucon, you're pretending to be the guy who knows something that's false. I will answer that he knows something. Something that is or something that is not. That is. How could something that is not be known? We are adequately assured of this, then, and would remain so no matter how many ways we examined it. What is completely an object of knowledge, and what is in no way at all is an object of ignorance. Okay, so he's trying to draw a distinction between knowledge and ignorance, saying, like, if you know the thing that is, that's knowledge. If you know the thing that is not, that is ignorance. How do we know which of our own beliefs are knowledge versus ignorance? I have no idea. Most adequately. Good. In that case, then, if anything is such as to be and also not to be, wouldn't it lie in between what purely is and what in no way is? Whew, anything is such as to be and also not to be. This is like Schrodinger's cat. I have no clue what he means if something is and is not. It's okay, it's half. I don't think there's any such thing as half being, but yes, in between them. We'll just follow along. Then, since knowledge deals with what is, ignorance must deal with what is not. Well, we must look in between knowledge and ignorance for what deals with what lies in between, if there is anything of that sort. I don't think there is. Glaucon, yes. So then, do we think there is such a thing as belief? Of course. Is it a different power from knowledge or the same? A different one. So belief has been assigned to deal with one thing then, and knowledge with another, depending on what power each has. Whew, this is getting pretty difficult. Okay. Belief, knowledge, depends on what power it has. Glaucon, right. Now, doesn't knowledge naturally deal with what is to know how what is? But first, I think we'd better go through the following. What? We think powers are a type of thing that enables us, or anything that has an ability, to do whatever we are able to do. Sight and hearing are examples of what I mean by powers, if you understand the kind of thing I am trying to describe. Aren't you glad he started with, like, a festival and not with this stuff? Like, if this book started with, like, oh, do you know what is and true belief and knowledge, I'd just be like, nah, close that book, go on to the next one. Instead, he's like, yeah, we're just at a rock concert and ran into this guy, Polemarchus, and he kind of bullied us into talking to his dad. Like, so much better. And then we go through all this fun stuff with, like, this ideal city and this crazy warrior class. Much more entertaining that way. God, you got to appeal to the human element if you want to persuade somebody and have them actually read your book. Okay, so sight and hearing are these powers, and okay, powers are things that enable us to do whatever we do. And now we're going to talk about the powers of knowledge versus the powers of belief. Maybe true knowledge has more power because it engages with the world in a more real way. Glaucon, yes, I do. Listen then to what I think about them. A power has no color for me to see, nor a shape, nor any feature of the sort that many other things have, and that I can consider in order to distinguish them for myself as different from one another. Power has nor color for me to see, nor a shape. Okay, so I think he's saying the shapes and stuff are in the things themselves, not in the power to see them. In the case of a power, I can consider only what it deals with and what it does, and it is on that basis that I come to call each power the power it is. Those assigned to deal with the same things and do the same, I call the same. Those that deal with different things and do different things, I call different. What about you? What do you do? Yeah, how do you feel about it? Leave a comment below. Those assigned to deal with the same things. Alright. I don't know. I'm getting a little lost here, but I think he's saying, like, if your left eye can see things and your right eye can also see things, then they deal with the same thing. But like, your left eye sees and your right ear hears, so they don't deal with the same thing. Socrates, going back to where we left off, my very good fellow, do you think knowledge is itself a power? Or to what type would you assign it? Glaucon, to that one. It is the most effective power of all. Knowledge is power. Heard it here first. Socrates, what about belief? Shall we include it as a power or assign it to a different kind? Glaucon, not at all. Belief is nothing other than the power that enables us to believe. Okay, so Glaucon at least is saying knowledge is power, belief is not a power. It's a power that enables us to believe something. Okay. But I think having other people believe something, that is definitely power. Socrates, but a moment ago you agreed that knowledge and belief are not the same. Glaucon, how could anyone with any sense think a fallible thing is the same as an infallible one? Fine. Then clearly we agree that belief is different from knowledge. Yes, it is different. So I think it's just saying, but like, you can believe anything about anything, but knowledge is the one that's like actual power in the world and is the truth. Now, how do we distinguish? I don't know. And again, we have sort of false belief was very prominent in book 1 or book 2 when he's tearing apart Polemarchus' argument. I guess that's book 1 about Justice saying, well, we don't really know who our friends are. So that is we have a false belief. And in that case, he said there's actually no getting out. There's no way to distinguish knowledge from belief. Or at least he didn't offer one. He did kind of offer one later when he's like, oh, but good souls have good speech patterns and good musical training, so that's how you know a good person, because they speak well. So now we're kind of back to saying that we can distinguish these two things. Maybe he might get to the point saying there's no hope of distinguishing belief from knowledge. A pretty important question. We shall see. All right. Okay, Glaucon, yes, it is different. Each of them, then, since it has different power, deals by nature with something different. Glaucon, necessarily. Socrates, surely knowledge deals with what is, to know what is as it is. Okay, so yeah, knowledge deals with whatever is out there. Glaucon, yes. Whereas belief, we say believes. Yes. The very same thing that knowledge knows. Can the object of knowledge and the object of belief be the same, or is that impossible? Can you have a belief about something you also have knowledge about, or something that someone else has knowledge about? Or are you just going to believe in, like, fake gods? Glaucon, it is impossible, given what we have agreed. If different powers by nature deal with different things, both opinion and knowledge are powers, but, as we claim different ones, it follows from these that the object of knowledge and the object of belief cannot be the same. Okay, so we agreed different powers deal with different things, but we agreed they're different ones. So we're like, belief is hearing and knowledge is seeing, for example. Then the object cannot be the same. Maybe, although you can see a car and hear a car. All right, Socrates. This is by far the most difficult passage in the entire book so far. So if you're struggling there at home, I'm right there with you. Socrates. Then if what is the object of knowledge, mustn't the object of belief be something other than what is? Yes, it must be something different. Okay, so if you have like a false belief about something, then that's really you have a belief about something else than what actually is there. Does belief then believe what is not? Or is it impossible to even believe what is not? Consider this. Doesn't a believer take his belief to deal with something? Or is it possible to believe, yet to believe nothing? To believe, but to believe nothing. Okay, so to have belief, but maybe not have an object of it? Okay, so... let's just say, like, I don't know, flying spaghetti monster as our object of belief. So he's saying, if we have a belief, does it have to deal with something? Or can it be with nothing? So if I believe in the flying spaghetti monster, is that nothing do I believe in nothing, and it's like this false belief because there's this objective reality and my belief doesn't correspond to it? Or does the act of believing kind of make it real in some sense? Maybe, because I think that's sort of the other argument, is like, everything in the world is just in your head anyway. Like this tree behind me, I say it's a tree, and I use the word tree, but really it's just an image in my head that I have of a tree. Like, I've just kind of said all the atoms that are in that area and look green, that's what the tree is. Does it correspond to something real there? Well, where does it begin and where does it end? Can we actually define it as an object that's distinct from other objects in a way that's not purely belief-driven and intuitively driven? I think that's a legitimate question. And my own belief there is, I think it's hard to answer that objectively, like where the tree starts and where it ends. And so, in some sense, any belief, it exists in the sense that anything else does in our heads. And maybe that's as far as we can get. Okay. So yeah, if you believe in a flying spaghetti monster, maybe that's just as legitimate as this tree, because that's just a pattern that I perceive. Maybe I perceive the flying spaghetti monster in my head with my mental senses. Okay, Glaucon, no, it's impossible. Socrates, in fact, there is some single thing that a believer believes. Glaucon, yes. But surely, what is not is most correctly characterized not as a single thing, but as nothing. Of course. Okay, so he's saying the believer doesn't believe nothing, it's got to believe something. So there's a thing that it believes, which only exists in his head. And Socrates is like, no, maybe it's really nothing. Ugh. This is hard. This this is the sort of reasoning and stuff that would just probably make me quit a philosophy class. Be like, I don't know what you guys are talking. Like something, nothing, belief. Is this just a word game that we're playing right now? Socrates. But we had to assign ignorance to what is not, and knowledge to what is. Vulcan, correct. So belief neither believes what is nor what is not. No, it does not. So it can't believe what is, because the thing is not, otherwise it would be knowledge. And it can't believe what is not, because it's got to take some kind of object. Glauca, no, it does not. Then belief cannot be either ignorance or knowledge. Is this where he's going to have, it's like, oh, it's halfway between them? Apparently not. Well then, does it lie beyond these two, surpassing knowledge and clarity, or ignorance and opacity? Okay, so he's saying it's like a spectrum. We've got belief, no, we got ignorance here, knowledge here. And Socrates is saying, oh, is it over here, exceeding knowledge and opacity? Or is it over here, exceeding ignorance and opacity over here, because this is ignorance? Or is it exceeding knowledge and clarity over here? Like, where is it on the spectrum, buddy? Glaucon says, no, it's not in either of those extremities. Socrates, then does belief seem to you to be more opaque than knowledge, but clearer than ignorance? So we got this scale here, and he's saying, well, it's clearer than ignorance, so it's on this side of ignorance, and it's more opaque than knowledge, so it's in between the two. Very much so. It lies within the boundaries determined by them. All right. Ignorance, belief, knowledge. That's all you need. Glaucon, yes. So belief will lie in between the two. Absolutely. Now, didn't we say earlier that if something turned out both to be and not to be at the same time, it would lie in between what purely is and what in every way is not, and that neither knowledge nor ignorance would deal with it? But whatever it was, again, that turned out to lie in between ignorance and knowledge would. Okay. So, neither knowledge nor ignorance deals with belief. Oh man, this is hard. Socrates. And now, what we are calling belief has turned out to lie in between. Glaucon, it has. Socrates, apparently then, it remains for us to find what partakes in both being and not being, and cannot correctly be called purely one or the other, so that if we find it, we can justifiably call it the object of belief, thereby assigning extremes to extremes and in-betweens to in-betweens. Isn't that so? Okay, so I think he's saying ignorance deals with what is not, knowledge deals with what is, belief is somewhere in between, so it has to deal with something that both is and is not. What a weird idea. Glaucon, it is. Now, that all that has been established, I want him to tell me this. The excellent fellow who believes that there is no beautiful itself, no form of beauty itself that remains always the same in all respects, but who does believe that there are many beautiful things. Okay, so this is like this guy who likes going to movies. And he's like, yeah, there are some good movies. There's no such thing as like an abstract good movie or like the perfect movie. It's just we got a lot of good films. I mean, that lover of seeing who cannot bear to hear anyone say that the beautiful is one thing or the just or any of the rest. I want him to answer the question. My good fellow, we will say, of all the many beautiful things, is there one that won't also seem ugly? Or any just one that won't seem unjust? Or any pious one that won't seem impious? Okay, it's like, won't we make mistakes somehow? Or sometimes. Just like in Book 1. Glaucon, there's not. On the contrary, it is inevitable that they would somehow seem both beautiful and ugly. Ugly hot. And at the same with the other things you asked about. Okay, is he saying it's inevitable they would... Okay, so the good fellow here has to admit that some beautiful things seem ugly. Like, I don't know, some paintings you're just like, oh man, that's an ugly painting, and then it kind of grows on you over time. Okay. Socrates. What about the many things that are doubles? Do they seem to be any the less halves than doubles? I have no idea what he's talking about. Glaucon, no. And again, will things that we say are great, small, light, or heavy be any more what we say they are than they will be the opposite? What? They seem to be any the less halves. So they don't... Okay, will things that we say are great, small, light, or heavy be any more what we say they are? Okay, so he's saying everything kind of has these two natures to it, or to them. So some beautiful things are also ugly, or can seem ugly, and then things that are great can seem small, things that are light can seem heavy. Okay, maybe it's because they're all relative, or at least they're all subjective. Like, this is a heavy laptop. You need to go to the gym. Okay, each of them is always both. Then is each of the many things any more what one says it is than it is not what one says it is? We're almost to the end of the book. Like, bear with me here. Glaucon, no. They are like those puzzles one hears at parties, or the children's riddle about the eunuch who threw something at a bat. The one about what he threw at it and what was in it. Yeah, what it was in. Yeah. Doesn't everyone know that story, that children's riddle about the eunuch who threw something at a bat? I will look at the note here. Alright, okay. Are you ready for the note? We're almost to the end. There are only 2 more notes after this. The riddle seems to have been this. A man who was not a man saw and did not see a bird that was not a bird in a tree, Zulon, that was not a tree. He hit Balian and did not hit it with a stone that was not a stone. Yeah, how did that happen? Explain that one. The answer is that a eunuch with bad eyesight saw a bat on a rafter, threw a pumice stone at it, and missed. For he saw a bird as ambiguous. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Whatever. It's just a riddle, and they're all not... Whatever. They're all things that are not as they seem. A pumice stone. It's a stone that's not a stone. When is a car not a car? Okay. Lost my train of thought here with this stupid riddle. For these things, too, are ambiguous, and one cannot understand them as fixedly being or fixedly not being, or as both, or as neither. Okay, I think this is where Socrates is getting to be kind of a postmodern. He's like, oh, everything is also its opposite. Everyone's on the spectrum. Everything's fluid. No absolute categories. Ahead of his time, man. Do you know... Oh, no, that's Glaucon talking. Socrates says, do you know what to do with them then, or anywhere better to put them than in between being and not being? Surely they cannot be more opaque than what is not, by not being more than it, nor clearer than what is, by being more than it. Okay, so it's something between being and not being, because everything is also kind of its opposite. It's the dialectic in action. Whew. Glaucon, that's absolutely true. So, we have now discovered, it seems, that the masses' many conventional norms concerning beauty and the rest are somehow rolling around between what is not and what purely is. Those masses don't have true taste. Glaucon, we have. And we agreed earlier that if anything turned out to be of that sort, it would have to be called an object of belief, not an object of knowledge. A wandering, in-between object, grasped by the in-between power. Okay, I think the argument is that these things that the masses think are beautiful, they can also be persuaded. It's like, oh, but that's also kind of ugly. Like, there are some not very good scenes in that movie. And they're like, well, okay, yeah, maybe some people think that. So he says, well, that must not be true knowledge, because it's not truly one thing. Or truly the other thing. It's dealing with these in-betweens. So that must be belief. And not true knowledge. True knowledge deals with these absolutes. I think that's what he means, but this is difficult philosophy. Glaucon, we did. As for those, then, who look at many beautiful things but do not see the beautiful itself, and are incapable of following another who would lead them to it. Or many just things but not the just itself, and similarly with all the rest. These people, we will say, have beliefs about all these things, but have no knowledge of what their beliefs are about. Okay. Capable of following another. Many just things, but not the just itself. Okay, so these are, I think he's basically saying these are people who deal with instances, but are incapable. Like the philosopher deals with the absolute, kind of the abstract justice that applies to all just things, but these regular people only deal in the instances. I think that's what he's saying. And so they don't have that true knowledge. It's like they just know the headlines. They don't see the big picture or something like that. Glaucon, that is what we would have to say. Socrates, on the other hand, what about those who in each case look at the things themselves that are always the same in every respect? Won't we say that they have knowledge, not mere belief? Those who in each case look at the things themselves that are always the same in every respect. Okay, so I think he's saying, it's like the guy who just sees beauty, and the beauty is the same. I see beauty in the birds, and in the trees, and in the sand, and the wind. That person's dealing with true knowledge. I think that's the argument here. Not just like, oh yeah, that's beautiful, that's beautiful. That's good too. Glaucon, once again we would have to. Shall we say then that these people are passionately devoted to and love the things with which knowledge deals, as the others are devoted to and love the things with which belief deals? We've not forgotten, have we, that the latter love and look at beautiful sounds, colors, and things of that sort, but cannot even bear the idea that the beautiful itself is a thing that is? Like, what is beauty? I can't even conceive it. Glaucon, no, we have not. Socrates, will we be striking a false note, then, if we call such people philodoxers, philodoxers, lovers of belief, rather than philosophers, lovers of wisdom or knowledge? Will they be very angry with us if we call them that? You philodoxer, you're not a true philosopher like me. Glaucon, not if they take my advice. It is not in accord with divine law to be angry with the truth. Socrates, so, those who in each case are passionately devoted to the thing itself are the ones we must call the not philodoxers, but philosophers. Glaucon, absolutely. Whew! Congratulations. You really, if you made it this far in the video, you really earned it. Pat yourself on the back right now. You made it to the halfway mark. You are halfway through the Republic. I hope that was the most difficult passage in the entire book, because that was a doozy. My lord, I haven't read anything that difficult in a long, long time. Okay, so what? Book 5. Man, we really covered a lot of ground. I think this is the longest book in the Republic. And it started out talking about, like, women in the military, women in the workplace, worked his way up to this eugenics program and communal living and abolishing the family. And then we started this book talking about war and how the Guardians actually make war, which we didn't really address before, except they're like, oh yeah, they'll have great physical and musical training. So he really gets in the details. He's like, yeah, we got to take the kids to war so they can observe, but then they have to have these really fast horses so that they can ride away so that they're not actually put in danger. And this will turn them into better warriors later. And then he gets into these rules for the Greeks in particular. So he starts getting into this idea of like whether this is a viable proposal that he has, and starts talking about it in the context of Greeks fighting Greeks. He's like, well, let's agree that Greeks should not burn each other's houses down and should only take 1 year's crop. And this will be better because we got to like reconcile later on. And this is just how Greeks ought to treat one another, and really we should be treating the barbarians. Those are the guys we really need to be cruel to. And remind you again, look up the Melian dialogue and tell me whether the tragedy at Milos happened before or after this was written, because I think that'll be important. And so, yeah, he just kind of lays down the final law for this society, and looking at it in the context of this world, of the Greek world that he lived in. And then finally, I guess I'm trying to remember, I think the transition was he said, well, let's look at the minimum number of changes we need to make to society to make this possible. And he's like, I was like, actually, the minimum change that we need to make is that the philosophers must become kings. And he had this very forceful, almost non-Socratic speech about that. He just kind of laid it out of nowhere. And I loved it because it was so powerful and unexpected. And the rest of this, is just like, is like a great moment in like professional wrestling when just like somebody lays down, or you hear the glass breaking, and like, Socrates is here. Uh-oh, what's he gonna do? He wants to be king. And so he doesn't immediately explain everything here. First, he's kind of laying out what a philosopher is. And so that's why we got into this really arcane discussion about the nature of knowledge and belief. Because he has to, in order to explain why the philosopher needs to be king, he needs to explain what a philosopher is. And so that was what this last passage was, and why it was so difficult. We really had to figure out what distinguishes a philosopher from everyone else. And his argument is that the philosopher loves knowledge rather than belief, and it's almost like he loves the thing behind the image, not the image. That's kind of how I would put it. Again, this was pretty difficult material. This is where I think it would really help to know Greek and know exactly what all these concepts are, because he talks about being and not being, knowledge and ignorance, and we got this like spectrum of belief, or spectrum of being almost, and it's tough. So the end result here is that, yeah, philosophers kind of know the truth. I guess I don't think he really uses the word truth. He just uses the phrase "what is," and at least in Socrates' mind, we started hinting at this idea of forms, so that everything that is beautiful manifests beauty somehow. So the philosopher knows what beauty is. The other people, like the foodies, just know what the good food to. They're like, oh, that's a good dish. That's a good dish. That's a bad dish. But it's like the true philosopher knows the nature of a good dish, or knows this abstraction of which everything else is a manifestation. So, yeah, that's as far as I understand it. I'll probably go back and reread all that bit, starting from talking about the nature of philosophy again, just so I can try to understand it. I really just didn't feel like I had a great grasp as I was going through it, because it's just so abstract, and basically everything I hate about philosophy. We're just like, okay, maybe these words you're using have meaning. Maybe it's just this abstraction and you're playing a word game. I really can't tell without studying this further. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Is this the most important book so far? Maybe. It's certainly started out as the most entertaining and then went to the most abstract. So it's, in terms of being interesting, I'd say it ranks pretty highly. All right, well, that's all I'm going to say about this one. I hope I gave you some food for thought there. If you have some other perspectives, or you think I screwed something up, or just want to say hi, leave a comment down below. I will take a look at it, and I'll read it, because I don't get a whole lot of comments here. If you're enjoying this, hit the subscribe button, hit the share button, hit the little bell next to subscribe. I think that's a good one. Make sure you get notified immediately when more of these videos come out. And I will see you tomorrow.